The HOA didn't want my vineyard. They needed the land under it. The morning the police rolled into my vineyard, the HOA president was already live streaming. She stood behind the deputies, smiling like she'd finally won. Then an officer asked me a simple question. Can you prove this land belongs to you? What nobody knew, not the police, not the HOA, not the people watching online, was that the answer was buried in records older than the subdivision itself. Records that could change everything they thought they owned. What started as a fight over a vineyard would uncover altered maps, hidden drainage secrets, and a truth powerful enough to shake an entire valley. And trust me, where this story ends is not where anyone thought it would. If you enjoy stories about standing your ground, protecting what's yours, and watching the truth come to light, take a second to subscribe and join us. Now let me tell you what happened when the HOA called the cops on my vineyard. The first thing I saw that morning wasn't the police. It was the lights. Red and blue flashes rolled across the vineyard rows outside my bedroom window, cutting through the darkness in slow pulses. For half a second, I thought there'd been an accident on the county road. Then I heard tires crunching gravel on my private drive. 2 vehicles. Heavy. Deliberate. I sat upright before the second cruiser stopped. Beside me, Claire stirred. What is it? She asked, still half asleep.
Who is that?
I was already moving toward the window. The sight waiting outside made my stomach tighten. 2 sheriff's cruisers sat near the lower edge of our vineyard. Their light bars painted the grape rows in alternating red and blue. The vines stretched down the slope in neat lines. Thousands of plants Claire and I had spent 3 years building together. 3 years. 3 years since cancer. 3 years since remission. 3 years since we came to Millbrook Valley, looking for peace. And now there were police parked in the middle of it. Claire stepped beside me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then he exhaled slowly. Madeline. I followed her gaze. Standing near the cruisers was a woman in a cream-colored jacket holding a phone in front of her face. Madeline Cross. HO, a president. Developer's daughter. Professional problem. Even from 50 yards away, I could see the smile on her face. Not a happy smile. A victory smile. The kind people wear when they think they're watching someone lose. She was filming. Of course she was filming. Every confrontation she'd ever started somehow ended up online. Every complaint, every accusation, every manufactured scandal. The only difference this morning was that she'd brought law enforcement with her, pulled on my boots. Stay inside, I told Claire. She shook her head immediately. No. I knew that tone. After what she'd survived, there wasn't much left in this world capable of intimidating her. We walked outside together. The cold air carried the smell of wet soil and diesel exhaust. Dawn hadn't arrived yet. A gray fog sat low across the valley floor, drifting between the vineyard rows. As we approached, one of the deputies stepped away from the cruisers. I recognized him immediately. Deputy Cole Ramirez. I'd met him twice before at county meetings. Good reputation. Professional. Not the type to play politics. That fact alone worried me. If Cole Ramirez was here, somebody had filed something serious. Morning, Mr. Mercer, he said. Deputy. His expression stayed neutral. We received a complaint regarding unauthorized commercial agricultural activity operating inside a restricted residential development zone. I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I looked directly at Madeline. She angled her phone toward me. The live stream was still running. Thousands of followers, probably. Maybe more. This wasn't an investigation. This was a performance. Madeline took a step forward. "Good morning, Ethan." I ignored her. Deputy Ramirez glanced toward the vineyard. "Do you mind answering a few questions?" "Depends." "Depends on what?" "Whether we're discussing facts or HOA fiction." Madeline's smile tightened. The deputy pretended not to notice. Behind him, the second officer stood quietly near the cruiser, observing everything. Claire folded her arms. "Let me guess," she said. "The vineyard suddenly became illegal overnight." Madeline laughed softly. "No one is saying illegal." "Then why are there police on my property before sunrise?" Claire asked. Madeline didn't answer. Because she couldn't. Instead, she shifted the conversation exactly where she'd wanted it from the beginning. "The issue," she said, "is ownership." There it was. Not agriculture, not zoning. Ownership. A word she'd been circling for years. Deputy Ramirez opened a folder. Inside were several documents. Copies. Maps, photographs. I recognized some of them instantly. They were HOA exhibits. The same altered boundary graphics I'd seen months earlier. The same maps that never quite matched county records. The same maps Rachel Bennett had warned me about. The deputy looked back at me. "Mr. Mercer." His voice stayed calm. Professional. Almost apologetic. Then he asked the question. The question that changed everything. "Sir, do you have proof this land belongs to you?" The valley suddenly felt very quiet. Even Madeline stopped talking. I could hear a sprinkler somewhere in the distance, a dog barking on the ridge, the faint hum of a truck miles away on the highway. Everyone was waiting. The officers. The neighbors gathering at the end of the road. Madeline's live stream audience, everyone. Because they thought this was the moment I folded. The moment I realized I couldn't fight a developer, couldn't fight an HOA, couldn't fight lawyers, couldn't fight money. What none of them understood was that I'd been preparing for this exact question for a very long time. Slowly, I reached into my back pocket. Madeline's eyes brightened. She thought she was watching a desperate man search for an excuse. Instead, I pulled out a folded document. The paper was worn from years of handling. The creases were soft, the edges slightly faded. I carried it every day. Not because I expected police to show up. Because I knew someday somebody would ask that question. I unfolded the paper carefully. Deputy Ramirez watched. Claire watched. Madeline watched. And for the first time all morning, I wasn't nervous, I wasn't angry, I wasn't afraid. Because the moment that document opened, the fight would stop being about a vineyard. It would stop being about an HOA. It would stop being about property values. And become something much bigger. Something buried beneath generations of valley history. Something the Cross family never should have touched. I looked directly at Madeline. Then I looked at the deputy. And as the first page unfolded in my hands, I remembered the day an old rancher named Hank Dawson warned me that this valley belonged to the people who controlled the water. Back then, I thought he was talking about floods. I had no idea he was talking about power. And I definitely had no idea that 3 years later, that warning would become the most important thing anyone ever told me. 3 years earlier, there were no police cars, no HOA hearings, no lawyers, no accusations, just me, Claire, and a decision that scared us both. The day her oncologist used the word remission, something changed in our lives. For nearly 2 years, every plan we'd made came with an invisible question hanging over it. What if there isn't enough time? When the appointments finally slowed down, Claire looked across our kitchen table one evening and said something simple. "We keep talking about someday." I nodded. We should stop waiting for it. 6 months later, we sold our house outside Denver. Most of our friends thought we'd lost our minds. A software consultant and a cancer survivor buying farmland in western Colorado wasn't exactly a common retirement plan. But we weren't chasing profit. We were chasing peace. That's how we ended up in Millbrook Valley. The property listing barely caught my attention at first. 15 acres, old irrigation access, small farmhouse, creek frontage. Nothing special. Until we drove out to see it. The moment Claire stepped out of the truck, I saw her expression change. For the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about doctors. She was thinking about the future. The valley spread below us like something untouched by modern life. Hayfields, ranch fences, cottonwoods following the creek, a few scattered homes sitting miles apart. No traffic, no noise, no neighbors telling each other how to live. Just land. The seller was Hank Dawson. Everyone in Millbrook Valley knew Hank. 70 years old, weathered face, permanent dust on his boots, the kind of man who could fix a tractor with a crescent wrench and pure stubbornness. After signing the preliminary paperwork, Hank offered to walk the property with me. We spent nearly an hour crossing fields and checking fences. Then, near the lower end of the acreage, he stopped. The creek curved through a shallow basin below us. Nothing looked unusual, at least not to me. Hank stared at it for a long moment. "You see where the hills come together?" he asked. I followed his finger. 3 ridgelines converged above the valley floor. "Sure. Everything eventually ends up down here." I thought he was talking about runoff. Floodwater. Drainage. Normal ranch concerns. "This place flood?" I asked. "Sometimes." That wasn't what seemed to interest him. He nudged a stone downhill with his boot and watched it disappear into the grass. Then he said something I wouldn't fully understand for years. "This valley belongs to the people who control the water." I laughed. "You talking about irrigation?" He didn't smile back. "No." For a second, I thought he might explain. Instead, he shook his head. "Just remember it." That was it. No story, no details, no explanation, just a warning. At the time, I filed it away with all the other bits of local wisdom older ranchers like to share. A few weeks later, Claire and I closed on the property. The first thing we planted wasn't vegetables, it wasn't fruit trees, it was grapes. Claire's grandmother had grown wine grapes decades earlier. During treatment, she'd spent long nights reading through old family notebooks. Recipes, sketches, planting schedules. Dreams she wasn't sure she'd ever get the chance to follow. The vineyard became our promise to each other. A promise that life wasn't over. Every post we set, every vine we planted, every irrigation line we buried. It felt like building something cancer couldn't touch. The work was exhausting and wonderful. For nearly 2 years, life was exactly what we'd hoped it would be. Quiet mornings, long days, good neighbors, no drama, no politics, no HOA. Then the trucks arrived. At first it was only a few. Construction vehicles climbing the ridge north of our property. Then more. Excavators, concrete trucks, survey crews. Within months, entire sections of former ranch land disappeared beneath grading equipment. One evening, I found Hank Dawson parked near my fence. His truck engine idled while he watched the activity on the ridge. "That's a lot of money up there," he said. "New subdivision?" Hank nodded. "Looks like it." The next week, a sign appeared beside the county road. Cross Creek Estates. Luxury Valley Living. The lettering looked expensive. The message was clear. Something was changing. Over the next year, 47 houses rose above the valley. New roads, decorative entrances, perfect landscaping, perfect lawns, perfect fences. Everything looked manufactured. Even the trees seemed arranged by committee. The contrast with the rest of Millbrook Valley couldn't have been sharper. Then, one afternoon, I noticed a white BMW parked near our vineyard entrance. The driver didn't get out, didn't wave, didn't speak. She simply sat there looking across the vines, studying them, almost measuring them. After a minute, the vehicle drove away. I didn't know her name then. I didn't know she was the developer's daughter. I didn't know she would spend the next 3 years trying to take my land. I only remember one thing. The feeling. The strange feeling that someone had just looked at my property and seen something completely different than I did. I saw a vineyard. Claire saw survival. But whoever sat behind that windshield saw something else, something valuable, something worth outbysting. 3 months later, the first certified letter from Cross Creek Estates arrived in our mailbox, and everything changed. I opened it at the kitchen counter while Claire was trimming grape cuttings for the next planting season. The envelope looked official. Too official. Inside was a 3-page notice printed on expensive paper. Notice of Community Compliance Review. I read the first paragraph twice, then a third time. Claire looked up. "What is it?" I handed her the letter. "They're claiming the vineyard violates community standards." Claire stared at me, then at the paper, then back at me. "We don't live in their community." That was my understanding too. The letter said our agricultural operation negatively impacted surrounding property values and required immediate review. There was even a response deadline. 30 days. As if they had authority over us. I checked the return signature. Madeline Cross. President. Cross Creek Estates, Homeowners Association. The same woman I'd seen sitting in that white BMW. The same woman who'd spent months watching our property from the ridge. That afternoon, I called the number listed on the notice. The receptionist transferred me immediately. No waiting. No questions. Almost like they had expected my call. Madeline Cross speaking. Her voice was smooth, confident, polished. The kind of voice that sounded rehearsed even during casual conversation. I introduced myself. Explained that my property existed long before the subdivision. Explained that we weren't operating a commercial winery. Explained that we simply owned a vineyard. There was a brief pause. Then she said something that stuck with me. "Mr. Mercer, valleys evolve." I frowned. I'm not sure what that means. It means communities change, and agricultural uses aren't always compatible with modern residential planning. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes. By the time it ended, I knew 2 things. First, she wasn't interested in compromise. Second, The vineyard itself wasn't the real issue. Something else was. I just didn't know what. 2 weeks later, she showed up in person. Claire and I were repairing a section of irrigation tubing near the lower rows when a white BMW pulled into our driveway. Madeline stepped out wearing designer boots that had clearly never touched mud before. She carried a tablet and a smile. Always the smile, the kind that never reached her eyes. Mr. Mercer. Madeline. Her gaze moved slowly across the vineyard, almost studying it. Calculating. Claire stood and brushed dirt from her gloves. Madeline looked her up and down. Work clothes, dusty boots, sun hat. Then she smiled. Mrs. Mercer. Claire is fine. Madeline nodded. Beautiful property. There was something artificial about the compliment, like it had been added for legal reasons. Then she turned toward the vines. You know, people moving into Cross Creek Estates expect a certain presentation. Claire folded her arms. A presentation? Visual consistency. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We're growing grapes. Exactly. The smile returned. Polite, sharp, dangerous. Some buyers find agricultural operations less desirable than preserved open space. Claire stared at her. For a second, I thought she might laugh. Instead, she spoke quietly. These vines are here because I survived cancer. The smile flickered, only for an instant. Then it returned. I'm very happy for your recovery. The words sounded correct. The tone didn't. But the community has to consider long-term property values. That was the moment something shifted inside me. Not anger. Not yet. Something colder. The realization that this wasn't about vineyards, or neighbors, or property values. Madeline wasn't talking like a resident. She was talking like someone protecting an investment. The conversation ended a few minutes later. Madeline left. But the letters didn't. Over the next several weeks, they multiplied. Compliance notices, review requests, community concerns. Every document carefully worded, every document carrying the same message. Leave. Then came the HOA meeting. The invitation claimed attendance was optional. Everyone knew it wasn't. The community center sat halfway between the valley and the subdivision. That night, the room was packed. Cross Creek residents filled the front rows. Local ranchers stayed near the back. I spotted Hank Dawson immediately. He gave me a look that said he'd seen this kind of thing before. Madeline sat at the center of a long table with 3 board members. A projector screen glowed behind them. When the meeting started, she stood. No emotion, no hostility, just confidence. As many of you know, we're reviewing a property compatibility concern. The screen lit up. An aerial image of my vineyard appeared. A bright red boundary line surrounded part of the lower acreage. The room grew quiet. Something about the image bothered me immediately. I couldn't explain why. Not yet. Just a feeling. Madeline clicked to the next slide. This area falls within our community influence zone. The phrase sounded official, but I'd never heard it before. Not in county planning, not in zoning law, not anywhere. I raised my hand. Madeline smiled. Yes, Mr. Mercer? What exactly is a community influence zone? A few people turned toward me. Madeline's smile never moved. It reflects modern development planning considerations. That wasn't an answer, and she knew it. The board voted 4-1 to continue enforcement review. The decision wasn't binding, but that wasn't the point. The point was pressure. As people filed out, Hank caught up with me in the parking lot. He didn't speak immediately. Instead, he looked back toward the projector screen still glowing inside. "Did you notice it?" he asked. "The map?" He nodded. I looked toward the building. Something felt off. Hank's expression darkened. That line wasn't there before. I stared at him. "What line?" "The one around your lower field." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he said something that made my stomach tighten. Someone moved it. And suddenly, I couldn't stop thinking about that red boundary line. Because if Hank was right, then somebody wasn't just harassing us. Somebody was changing the rules. And people only do that when they're trying to hide something. I couldn't stop thinking about Hank's words. That line wasn't there before. The next morning, I drove straight to the Millbrook County Records office. At first, I expected a simple explanation, a mapping update, a survey correction, maybe a zoning adjustment I'd missed. Instead, I spent 6 hours staring at documents that made less sense the longer I looked at them. The original subdivision filings for Cross Creek Estates were easy enough to find. Every approved boundary was clearly marked. Every parcel line had county certification, and according to those records, the subdivision stopped exactly where my property began. No overlap, no influence zone, no special authority, nothing. I printed the maps. Then I requested the most recent planning overlays. That's when things got strange. The newer maps showed a red boundary extending into my lower acreage. Not much, 30 yards at most. But enough. Enough to include part of my vineyard. Enough to justify every letter Madeline had sent. Enough to create a problem where none had existed before. I laid both maps side by side. Old on the left, new on the right. The creek alignment matched. The roads matched. The ridge lines matched. Only one thing had moved. The boundary. I sat there staring at it. A software consultant spends enough years looking at systems, you start recognizing patterns. Data doesn't accidentally shift in one direction. Not without a reason. Not without a hand behind it. I requested the digital records. The clerk seemed surprised. Most people never ask for metadata. I did. Creation dates. Modification dates. Version history. The deeper I looked, the worse it got. The original file had been submitted when Cross Creek Estates received final approval. Nothing unusual there. But 18 months later, the boundary overlay had been modified. Not by the county, not by planning staff, not by survey officials. A private planning contractor. I wrote the company name down. Then I looked at the modification notes. There weren't any. No explanation, no approval reference, no county review record. Just a changed boundary. I leaned back in my chair. That wasn't a mistake. That was evidence. When I got home, Claire was waiting at the kitchen table. She could tell immediately something had happened. "What did you find?" I spread the maps across the table. Her eyes moved back and forth between them. "Those aren't the same." "No. They changed it. Looks that way." Claire sat quietly for a moment. Then she asked the question I hadn't been able to answer all day. "Why?" I looked down at the lower section of the map, the part they kept targeting, the part they seemed obsessed with. "I don't know yet." 2 days later, another certified letter arrived. This one was more aggressive. The HOA claimed my irrigation shed now sat inside their review area. A week after that, Another notice arrived, then another. Every new complaint referenced the same altered boundary. Every complaint depended on that red line existing. The pattern was becoming impossible to ignore. Madeline wasn't reacting to a problem. She was building one. The next HOA meeting confirmed it. This time the room was even fuller. Cross Creek residents packed every seat. Some looked annoyed. Some looked confused. Most looked like they'd only heard one side of the story. Madeline stood beside the projector, confident as ever. The altered map appeared behind her again. I raised my hand before she even started speaking. She hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, Mr. Mercer?" I stood. "Can you provide the county authorization for that boundary adjustment?" The room went quiet. Madeline smiled. But this time it looked forced. The planning overlays have already been reviewed. By whom? The appropriate parties. Which parties? A board member shifted uncomfortably. Madeline's jaw tightened. The information is available through proper channels. That wasn't an answer, and everyone in the room knew it. I pulled a copy of the original county map from my folder. Then another. And another. I laid them across an empty chair near the aisle. "Interesting thing about county records," I said. "They tend to remember what people hope gets forgotten." The room got very still. Madeline's smile vanished completely. For the first time, I saw something different in her expression. Not confidence. Concern. The meeting ended earlier than expected. No explanations, no discussion, just an abrupt adjournment. As people filed out, several residents stopped to look at the maps I'd brought. Questions started, spreading through the room. Whispers. Doubts. Curiosity. Exactly the things Madeline couldn't afford. Outside, Hank Dawson was leaning against his truck, waiting. "How bad is it?" he asked. I handed him the modified map. He studied it for less than 10 seconds. Then he shook his head. "They got greedy, who?" Hank folded the paper. His eyes moved toward the ridge where Cross Creek Estates sat above the valley. "The people who think nobody remembers what came before them." I followed his gaze. Rows of expensive homes stretched across land that used to belong to ranchers, developers, investors, lawyers, people with money, people with influence, people who apparently felt comfortable moving lines on county maps. For the first time, I stopped thinking this was an HOA dispute. This was something bigger. Because nobody risks altering public records unless the payoff is worth the danger. And somewhere beyond that boundary line, there was a reason they needed my land. I just hadn't found it yet. But I was getting closer. And whoever moved that line was starting to realize I wasn't going away. The pressure campaign started less than a week later. At first, it looked random. A county code officer arrived one Tuesday morning asking about our irrigation shed. Someone had reported an unpermitted agricultural structure. The shed had been standing there longer than Cross Creek Estates had existed. The inspector checked his paperwork twice, then apologized. 2 days later, another official showed up. Electrical compliance review. The week after that, environmental runoff questions. Then water usage inquiries. Then safety assessments. Every visit came from a different department. Every visit originated from an anonymous complaint. Individually, none of them were serious. Together, they became impossible to ignore. Someone was trying to bury us in paperwork. Claire noticed it before I did. "They're not looking for violations," she said one evening. "They're looking for exhaustion." She was right. Every inspection cost time. Every report required responses. Every visit disrupted work. And vineyard work doesn't wait, especially during growing season. The next attack came online. A Facebook group appeared almost overnight. Protect Millbrook property values. The page posted aerial photos of our vineyard, photos of our house, photos of our equipment. The captions were carefully written, never openly false, just misleading enough to cause damage. Questions about environmental impacts, questions about commercial activity, questions about neighborhood standards. The comments got worse. Most came from people who had never stepped foot on our property. People who believed whatever they were told. The group grew quickly. So did the rumors. Within a month, local suppliers started acting differently. One feed supplier suddenly delayed deliveries. A contractor canceled a scheduled repair. A farmer's market coordinator stopped returning emails. Nobody admitted why. They didn't have to. Pressure works best when nobody takes responsibility for it. Then came the heat wave. 5 straight days above 100 degrees. The kind of weather vineyards survive only with proper irrigation. I woke up early one morning and immediately knew something was wrong. The pumps were running, but pressure levels were low. Too low. I grabbed a flashlight and headed toward the lower rows. The first cut appeared near a junction box. Clean, deliberate, not accidental damage, not animal activity. A cut. I followed the line, found another, then another, 3 separate breaks, placed perfectly. Whoever did it understood irrigation systems. They knew exactly where to hit. I stood there staring at the damaged pipe. The realization landed hard. This wasn't harassment anymore. Someone had crossed into sabotage. Claire found me 20 minutes later. She didn't say anything at first. She simply looked at the broken line, then at the vineyard. The vines were still alive, but without water, they wouldn't stay that way. I watched her place a hand on one of the posts. For a second, the expression on her face reminded me of hospital waiting rooms, of treatment schedules, of battles we'd already fought once. That hurt more than the damaged pipe. Because the vineyard wasn't just a, business. It was proof. Proof she'd survived. Proof we had a future. And somebody was trying to destroy it. Claire finally looked at me. This wasn't random. No. You know who did it? I thought about the inspections, the complaints, the altered maps, the HOA meetings, the Facebook campaign. Then I shook my head. Not yet. But I knew where to start looking. That afternoon, I called the only person I trusted to view this as more than a neighborhood dispute. Rachel Bennett. We'd met years earlier through a land use conference. Sharp, methodical, the kind of attorney who read every page twice. By evening, she was sitting at our kitchen table surrounded by maps, inspection notices, and county records. She spent nearly an hour reviewing everything without speaking. Finally, she looked up. "You're focusing on the wrong question." I frowned. What question should I be asking? Rachel tapped the altered boundary map. "You keep asking why they want your vineyard." She slid the document across the table. "You should be asking why they're in such a hurry." The room went quiet. Claire leaned forward. "So what's the answer?" Rachel looked toward the lower section of the property. the area everyone seemed obsessed with. The answer, she said carefully, is usually hidden in whatever people refuse to leave alone. I followed her gaze. The lower field, the same field mentioned in the altered maps, the same field targeted by every complaint, the same field Hank Dawson had pointed at years ago. And suddenly I realized something. Nobody had ever cared about the upper vineyard. Nobody cared about the house. Nobody cared about the barn. Every attack traced back to the same piece of land, the lower valley. The question wasn't whether they wanted it. The question was why they needed it. And for the first time, I had someone helping me find out. Rachel Bennett arrived the next morning carrying 2 banker boxes and enough determination to make people nervous. She didn't start with the HOA. She started with the developer. "Always follow the money," she said, for 3 days. She dug through public records while I kept the vineyard running and answered yet another round of inspection notices. Every evening, she'd return with more documents. Environmental reports, engineering studies, drainage permits, construction filings. Most of it looked painfully boring, until she started connecting the pieces. On the 4th day, she spread a large map across our kitchen table. Claire and I stood on opposite sides. Rachel pointed to Cross Creek Estates. Then she traced her finger downhill, straight toward my lower field. "What do you see?" "Houses," Claire said. "Expensive houses," I added. Rachel nodded. "Now let's look underneath them." She slid another document on top. A drainage analysis, then another. A stormwater study, then another. A flood mitigation report. The more papers she added, the clearer the picture became. Cross Creek Estates wasn't supposed to exist where it had been built, at least not without additional protection. Rachel tapped a highlighted section buried deep inside an engineering review. "Read that." I scanned the paragraph, then read it again. My stomach tightened. Projected overflow zone. Emergency retention basin. Downstream runoff containment. The highlighted area matched my lower field almost perfectly. Claire looked at me. "What does that mean?" Rachel answered before I could. "It means your land absorbs water the subdivision can't handle." The room fell silent. I stared at the map. Suddenly, Hank's warning didn't feel so cryptic anymore. Everything eventually ends up down here. Rachel continued. The valley naturally channels runoff from 3 ridges. Her finger followed the terrain lines. During major storms, water flows into this basin. She tapped my property. This basin. I looked at the subdivision again. The houses, the roads, the decorative ponds, the retention systems. Everything sitting uphill, everything depending on gravity, everything depending on somewhere for excess water to go. My land. Claire folded her arms. "If that's true, why are they fighting us?" Rachel gave a humorless smile. "Because they built first and solved problems later." She opened another report. This one came from a consulting engineering firm hired during development. Several sections had been redacted, but not all of them. One paragraph remained visible. Alternative basin acquisition recommended. I looked up. Acquisition. They needed this land. The words landed hard. Not wanted. Needed. Rachel nodded. The engineers knew it. She slid over another document. A permitting review. Then another. An insurance compliance summary. Then another. Investor disclosures. Each one told the same story. Without adequate runoff control, Cross Creek Estates faced regulatory exposure, permit reviews, higher insurance costs, potential liability, expensive liability, the kind investors hate. Claire sat down slowly. So the vineyard was never the issue. No. The inspections weren't the issue. No. The HOA complaints weren't the issue. Rachel shook her head. The issue is your lower field. I thought back over 3 years. The altered maps. The inspections. The irrigation sabotage. The endless pressure campaign. Every road led back to the same place. That field. The piece of land everyone seemed desperate to control. I leaned over the map. If it's that important, why didn't they just buy it? Rachel's expression changed. For the first time all evening, she looked surprised. Then she reached into one of the boxes, pulled out a stack of photocopied mailers, and slid them across the table. I recognized them immediately, or at least I thought I did. Fast cash offers, land acquisition opportunities, rural property investment groups, generic junk mail, the kind I threw away without opening. Rachel tapped the top envelope. This LLC belongs to a company linked to Victor Cross, Madeline's father, the developer. I looked at another, then another. Different company names, same ownership chain, same attorneys, same mailing address. A slow realization settled over me. They already tried. Rachel nodded. More than once. Claire stared at the stack. And when that failed, Rachel pointed toward the altered boundary map hanging off the edge of the table. They changed tactics. The room felt smaller. 3 years of harassment suddenly made perfect sense. The HOA wasn't enforcing rules. The HOA was applying pressure. Pressure designed to make us sell. Pressure designed to make us leave. Pressure designed to turn a voluntary transaction into a desperate one. I walked to the window. The lower field stretched toward the creek. Nothing about it looked special. No buildings, no vineyard rows, no obvious value. Yet somehow an entire development depended on it. Rachel's voice broke the silence. There's one more thing. I turned around. She was holding a much older file. Different paper, different county stamps, older than everything else we'd reviewed. What's that? Rachel looked down at it, then back at me. It's what I requested after seeing the runoff reports. For the first time all night, there was excitement in her voice. Real excitement. The Valley records. I frowned. What Valley records? Rachel slowly opened the file. Records older than the subdivision, older than the county maps, older than the engineering reports, older than Cross Creek Estates itself. Then she looked directly at me. And if I'm right, Ethan. She paused. They aren't just afraid of losing your land. My stomach tightened. Rachel tapped the aged document. They're afraid of what happens if people discover what comes with it. Claire and I exchanged a glance. The file looked nothing like the modern records we'd been reviewing. The pages were older. Some were scanned copies of handwritten filings. Others carried county seals that hadn't been used in decades. Rachel carefully opened the first document. What you're looking at, she said, is a chain of valley easement records that predates Cross Creek Estates by more than a century. I sat down. How much more? Over 100 years. The room went quiet. Rachel slid a map across the table. Unlike the modern planning overlays, this one showed the valley as a complete watershed system. Creeks, drainage channels, natural retention areas, runoff corridors. The entire valley functioned as one connected network, and right in the center of it sat my lower field. Rachel pointed directly at it. "This isn't just land." I frowned. "Then what is it?" "It's control." The word hung in the room. Rachel pulled out another document, an easement declaration, then another, a water management agreement, then a third. Historical Drainage Authority records. Every document referenced the same section of land, the same lower basin. My lower basin, Claire, leaned forward. "What exactly does Ethan own?" Rachel smiled for the first time all evening. "Not what?" She tapped the map. "Where?" I looked at the highlighted area again, still confused. Rachel flipped to the final page. The language was old, complicated, legal. But one phrase appeared over and over. Primary watershed easement holder. I read it twice, then a third time. Slowly, carefully. The meaning hit me all at once. The lower field wasn't important because of what sat on. It was important because of what flowed through it. Water. Every major drainage channel in Millbrook Valley eventually crossed easements tied to my parcel. Every emergency runoff route, every overflow corridor, every retention path, including the systems supporting Cross Creek estates. Claire looked stunned. "So if those easements belong to Ethan?" Rachel nodded. "The subdivision depends on them." The room suddenly felt very small. For 3 years, Madeline had treated us like a nuisance, a problem, an obstacle. Meanwhile, her entire development was sitting on infrastructure connected to rights she didn't control. I leaned back, trying to absorb what I was hearing. "So the HOA knew?" Rachel's expression hardened. "Oh, they knew." She reached into the file and pulled out another document. This one wasn't historical. It was modern. A consultant review prepared during development. Several sections had been redacted. One hadn't. Property acquisition strongly recommended to secure watershed continuity. I stared at it. They knew. Yes. They built anyway. Yes. Claire shook her head. "That's insane." Rachel nodded. "It's expensive to redesign drainage systems. More expensive than buying my land." Rachel laughed. Not because it was funny, because she already knew the answer. They tried to buy it. I remembered the stack of mailers, the shell companies, the fake investment offers, the pressure campaign. Every piece fit together now. When I wouldn't sell, they tried persuasion. When persuasion failed, they tried pressure. When pressure failed, they altered maps. And when that wasn't enough, they escalated. The realization sent a chill through me. This had never been about rules or property values or community standards. The HOA wasn't protecting the subdivision. The HOA was protecting a mistake. A very expensive mistake. Rachel closed the file, but that's not the best part. I looked up. "There's more?" "Oh, yes." She slid one final document toward me. A county legal summary completed during a prior easement review. I scanned the highlighted section, then stopped, then read it again. Exclusive authority regarding watershed access modifications. I looked at Rachel. "What does this mean?" It means nobody can legally alter or interfere with those runoff systems without cooperation from the easement holder. Claire blinked, the easement holder being Ethan. Rachel nodded. The room went silent. For the first time in 3 years, the balance of power shifted. Not emotionally. Legally. Objectively. The documents didn't care about HOA votes. They didn't care about social media campaigns. They didn't care about developers. The records were older than all of them. And they were still valid. I walked to the window. The lower field stretched into darkness beyond the house. The same field everyone kept targeting. The same field I'd spent years defending without fully understanding why. Now I knew. Madeline wasn't fighting a vineyard. She was fighting the legal foundation supporting her subdivision. Rachel gathered the papers. We need to be smart. I nodded. What do you recommend? She smiled. The kind of smile lawyers get when they know the facts are finally on their side. We don't attack, no? No. She pointed toward the lower field. We remind them what's there. The next morning, I ordered survey stakes. That afternoon, I scheduled a legal easement review. And 2 days later, I approved a sign that would send Cross Creek Estates into complete panic. Because once the Valley records came out, the HOA's biggest fear became reality. I finally knew what they were hiding. And they were about to learn that I knew. Rachel's advice was simple. Don't threaten them. Don't sue them. Don't even contact them. Just make sure they understand the truth has surfaced. So that's exactly what I did. 3 days later, a flatbed trailer rolled onto my lower field carrying survey stakes, drainage markers, and one very large sign. I positioned everything near the section of land that appeared on every altered map. The same section Madeline had spent 3 years trying to claim. The same section tied to the watershed easements. The same section Cross Creek Estates depended on. Claire watched from the fence line as I unwrapped the sign. 8 feet wide, bright orange, impossible to miss. I bolted it to 2 steel posts and drove them into the ground. The message was simple: Agricultural Water Retention Project Authorized Survey Zone. No trespassing, legal easement review in progress. Claire read it twice, then looked at me. Think they'll notice? I glanced toward the ridge where Cross Creek Estates overlooked the valley. Oh, they'll notice. Less than 20 minutes later, a white BMW appeared on the ridge road. Madeline. Even at that distance, I recognized the car. It slowed, stopped, stayed there. The vehicle didn't move for nearly a full minute. Then it abruptly turned around and disappeared back into the subdivision. I smiled. Because I knew exactly what she had just seen. Not a sign. A warning. Not from me. From the records. That evening, the first HOA emergency email was forwarded to me by a resident I'd never met. Subject line: Urgent Community Infrastructure Review. The message was vague, corporate, carefully worded. But the panic leaked through every sentence. The next morning, another email went out. Then another. Emergency board session. Infrastructure consultation. Immediate attendance requested. By the third day, board members were holding closed-door meetings. Residents started asking questions. Investors began making calls. And for the first time in years, the pressure wasn't aimed at me. It was aimed uphill, toward Madeline, toward the people who had created the problem. Rachel loved every second of it. They're terrified. What makes you so sure? She handed me a printed email. The sender was an engineering consultant connected to the development. The recipient list included Victor Cross, Madeline's father. Most of the message was redacted. One sentence wasn't. Watershed review creates significant exposure risk. Exposure. A lawyer's favorite word. It meant liability, financial risk, regulatory consequences, the kind of language that makes investors nervous. And nervous investors ask questions. Questions developers hate answering. A week later, I was installing additional survey markers when Deputy Cole Ramirez pulled into the driveway. He stepped out of his cruiser and looked toward the sign, then toward the lower field, then at me. You planning construction? Survey work. He nodded. Everything legal? I almost laughed. More legal than anything the HOA has been doing. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. He looked around to make sure nobody else was nearby, then lowered his voice. You've got people talking. I've noticed. They seem worried. I followed his gaze toward Cross Creek Estates. So do I. Cole paused, then said something interesting. Madeline's been calling county offices every day. That got my attention. Asking about what? Everything. He shook his head. Drainage permits, easements, historical filings. My pulse quickened. She knew. Not suspected. Not worried. Knew. The sign had confirmed everything. The records were real. The easements were real. And the control she'd spent years pretending to have didn't actually belong to her. It belonged to me. That night, Claire found me sitting on the porch reviewing documents. You look calm. I am. She smiled. That's usually when you're most dangerous. I laughed. Rachel said panic makes people careless. And? I looked toward the dark ridge where Cross Creek Estates sat above the valley, and I think they're getting close. The next morning, I installed 3 trail cameras around the lower field. Not because I expected trouble, because I expected desperation. There was a difference. The first camera covered the survey stakes. The second covered the sign. The third overlooked the access road leading down from the subdivision. When Rachel saw the setup, she nodded approvingly. Good. You think they'll come? I think people who spent years moving boundaries and, manipulating records don't suddenly become honest. She looked directly at the sign. They're running out of options. That night I checked every camera twice before heading inside. Nothing happened. The next night was quiet too. Then came the third night. At exactly 3:17 a.m., my phone vibrated on the nightstand. Motion alert. Lower field camera. I opened my eyes immediately. A second alert followed, then a third. Someone was on the property, and based on the direction of travel, they weren't coming from the county road. They were coming from Cross Creek Estates. I was fully awake before the third alert arrived. The trail camera feed opened on my phone. 3 figures, 1 vehicle, moving through the lower field. I immediately recognized the SUV. Not because I'd seen that specific vehicle before, because it was parked in the driveway of Madeline Cross's house almost every time I drove through the subdivision. I sat up. Claire was already awake. What is it? I handed her the phone. She watched the screen for 3,000 seconds, then sighed. They actually did it. The camera showed the group moving directly toward the survey markers. Not wandering, not lost, not confused. Purposeful. Rachel had been right. Panic had turned into desperation. I pulled on my boots and grabbed the tablet connected to the camera system. A second feed activated, then a third. Every angle was recording. Cloud backup enabled, timestamps verified. Everything documented. By the time I stepped onto the porch, the first survey marker had already been removed. One of the men tossed it into the back of the SUV. The second man headed toward the sign. Then the driver's door opened, and Madeline stepped out. Even in the grainy night footage, I recognized her immediately. The same confidence, the same expensive jacket, the same certainty that rules applied to everyone except her. She marched straight to the sign, grabbed one side, pulled. Nothing happened. The sign stayed exactly where it was. She tried again. Harder, still nothing. The posts had been sunk. Deep. Madeline turned toward the contractors. Get it out. The audio wasn't perfect, but it was good enough. One of the men grabbed a pry bar from the SUV. The second started digging around the base. The sign shook. The bolts held. I opened the drone app. Rachel had insisted on adding it to the system. Evidence is strongest when nobody can argue about the angle. The drone lifted silently from its charging station behind the barn. Within seconds, it was hovering above the field, recording everything. The overhead view was even better. 3 trespassers, 1 vehicle, visible survey markers, visible property boundaries, visible destruction. The kind of footage lawyers dream about. Madeline didn't know any of it. She was too busy trying to erase the problem. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 3 years, she'd accused me of violating rules. Now she was standing on private property in the middle of the night, trying to destroy legally installed survey markers. The woman practically built her reputation around compliance. And here she was, caught on camera, breaking the very standards she preached. Then things got worse for her. One of the contractors pulled too hard. The pry bar slipped. Madeline stumbled backward into the muddy runoff ditch beside the sign. Not deep, not dangerous, just humiliating. Her right boot disappeared into the mud. She nearly fell. The contractor tried to help. She shoved his hand away. Even through the audio compression, I could hear her frustration. The calm HOA president was gone. The polished public image was gone. All that remained was panic. I watched for another 30 seconds, then decided it was time. I started walking downhill. No rush, no shouting, no drama, just a property owner approaching people who didn't belong there. The crunch of gravel announced my arrival. Madeline turned first. The look on her face changed immediately. She saw me. Then she saw the drone. Then she saw the blinking indicator light on the nearest trail camera. For the first time all night, she understood what had happened. Not a confrontation. A recording. Not an argument. Evidence. I stopped about 20 feet away. The contractors froze. Nobody spoke. The silence lasted several seconds. Then I broke it. You should leave. That was it. No threats, no lecture, no anger, just 4 words. Madeline looked toward the sign, then the camera, then back at me. For a moment, I thought she might try to defend herself. Explain. Deny. Pretend. Instead, she looked at the SUV. The fight had finally left her. Without another word, she turned around and walked away. One boot covered in mud. the other contractor still holding the pry bar. The second carrying a survey stake he quickly dropped. The SUV doors slammed, the engine started, tires spun, and 30 seconds later they were gone. I stood there listening to the drone hover overhead. The sign remained standing, the survey markers remained in place, and my phone continued uploading footage to 3 separate backups. Claire joined me a few minutes later. She looked toward the empty road. Think, they're finished? I shook my head. No. Because I knew exactly what would happen next. Madeline had spent years controlling the narrative. Now the narrative controlled her. The footage wasn't just evidence of trespassing. It connected everything. The pressure campaign, the altered maps, the desperation surrounding the lower field. For the first time, we had proof that the people demanding compliance had no intention of following the law themselves. And in less than 48 hours, Rachel Bennett was scheduled to present that proof at a public hearing packed with residents, county officials, and investors. Madeline had walked onto my property trying to destroy evidence. Instead, she'd created the most damaging evidence of her life. And soon, everyone in Millbrook Valley was going to see it. The public hearing started at 6 o'clock on a Thursday evening. By 5:30, every seat in the county community center was filled. Cross Creek residents occupied the front rows. Farmers and ranchers lined the back wall. County staff moved between tables carrying folders and laptops. Even before the meeting started, the atmosphere felt different. For 3 years, Madeline had controlled the conversation. This time, she didn't. Rachel Bennett did. I sat beside Claire near the center of the room. Across the aisle sat Hank Dawson. A few rows ahead, I spotted Deputy Cole Ramirez speaking quietly with a county supervisor. Then I saw Madeline. For the first time since this began, she looked tired. Victor Cross sat beside her. Neither of them looked particularly confident. The hearing opened with routine remarks. Then Rachel stood. No dramatic introduction. No speech. Just facts. She connected her laptop to the projector. The first image appeared on the screen, the original subdivision boundary map. Then the altered version, side by side. Simple, clear, impossible to ignore. Rachel highlighted the difference. The room immediately began whispering. A county planning official stepped forward. He confirmed that no approved county record existed authorizing the boundary adjustment. More whispers. More questions. Victor Cross leaned forward in his chair. Madeline stared at the screen. Rachel moved to the next slide. Drainage studies, stormwater reports, engineering recommendations. One document after another, each showing the same conclusion. Cross Creek Estates depended on the lower basin located on my property. The room became noticeably quieter. People were paying attention now, especially homeowners, especially investors. Then Rachel delivered the part nobody expected. The Valley records. She displayed the historical easement documents, the watershed maps, the legal summaries, the records proving that my property controlled the primary watershed easements connected to the valley's runoff system. Several residents visibly turned toward Madeline. Some looked confused, others looked angry. One man stood up. "Are you saying our drainage system depends on land the HOA doesn't control?" The county official answered. "Based on the records presented, yes." The silence that followed was heavier than any argument. Rachel wasn't finished. She clicked once more. The screen went black. Then the footage began. Night vision. Timestamp 3:17 a.m., the lower field, the survey markers, the sign, and then Madeline. The room watched in complete silence as she crossed onto private property, watched her direct the contractors, watched her attempt to remove the sign, watched her participate in the destruction of survey markers. Every second documented, every second undeniable. Nobody interrupted, nobody defended her, nobody could. The final frame froze with Madeline standing beside the sign moments before leaving the property. Rachel stepped away from the projector. She didn't need to say anything else. The evidence had spoken for itself. Then the county supervisor stood. His voice was calm, professional, measured, but every word landed like a hammer. Based on the evidence presented, the county will be initiating a formal review regarding altered planning records, easement disclosures, and associated permitting processes. A murmur moved through the room. Then he continued. Additional materials will be referred to investigators for further examination. Nobody needed clarification. Everyone understood what he meant. The room turned toward Madeline. For years, she had answers for everything. This time she didn't. She stood slowly, hands shaking slightly, and finally said the thing she'd spent years trying not to admit. If this project fails, hundreds of people lose everything. The words echoed across the room. Not a defense, a confession. Because she wasn't talking about property values. She wasn't talking about community standards. She was talking about protecting a mistake. A mistake she and her father had spent years trying to hide. The reaction was immediate. Residents began asking questions. Investors walked out to make phone calls. Board members avoided eye contact. The illusion shattered all at once. The HOA wasn't protecting homeowners. The homeowners had been protecting the HOA. Without knowing it. Within weeks, regulatory reviews began. Several board members resigned. The altered boundary filings were formally withdrawn. Cross Creek Estates entered a long and expensive compliance process. And for the first time since moving to Millbrook Valley, nobody sent letters to my house. Nobody filed complaints. Nobody questioned the vineyard. 6 months later, the valley felt different. Quieter, healthier, honest. The drainage systems were being redesigned. The remaining homeowners finally had access to the information they'd been denied for years. And our vineyard was thriving. One autumn evening, Claire and I sat on the porch watching the sun settle behind the ridge. The harvest was nearly finished. Rows of grapes stretched across the slope below us. The same vines we'd planted after cancer. The same vines people tried to destroy. Claire handed me a glass of wine and smiled. Worth it? I looked across the valley, past the creek, past the lower basin, past the subdivision that almost took everything from itself. Then I nodded. Yeah. Because the truth is, we didn't win by fighting harder. We won by refusing to surrender facts. We won because records matter, evidence matters, truth matters. For 3 years, they thought they were fighting a vineyard. They never realized they were fighting the valley itself.
If there's the one lesson I take from all of this, it's that the Jew has a way of outlasting weather. For years, people looked at my vineyard and saw a problem. What they didn't see were the records, the history, and the responsibility tied to that land. The fact was there the whole time. They just needed someone willing to slow down, keep digging, and refuse to walk away from them. Sometimes standing your ground isn't about being the loudest person in the room. Sometimes it's about being patient enough to let the two catch up. And maybe that's the matter most. Land, homes, and communities aren't held together by promise or opinions. They are held together by trust, honesty, and people willing to do the right thing even when it's difficult. In the end, what was reserved wasn't just a vineyard, it was a piece of the valley. His story, the idea, facts still matter. I love to hear what you think. Have you ever deal with an HOA, a property dispute, or a situation where you had to stand firm and let the truth speak for itself? If so, write a yes in the comments or share your story below. I read as many of them as I can. And if you enjoy stories about perseverance, property rights, and ordinary people facing difficult situations with patience and determination, consider subscribing. There are plenty more stories ahead, and I'd be glad to have you along for the journey.